Welcome to The Human Thread, a space for those seeking something real in a world dominated by noise and algorithms. I'm Greg, and here we unravel the fabric of authentic connection through creativity, meaningful conversations, and reflections on the messy, beautiful human experience. Let's dive into the threads that bind us beyond likes and follows to meaning, art, and genuine dialogue. In my previous posts, I've explored how expertise can sometimes kill creativity, and how audience expectations create impossible standards for artists as they evolve. I have one final perspective to this topic. By the way, don't hold me to this. Every time I think I'm finished with this, another idea pops into my head. But for now, I think I have one more final perspective for this topic, and that is the rules themselves. In every creative field, there are rules, conventions, standards, best practices, the accumulated wisdom that gets passed down through education and training. But what happens when we don't know these rules yet? Well, I believe something magical. There's a really cool story about Miles Davis that relates to this. When he was recording Kind of Blue, he deliberately gave his musicians minimal prep. Legend says he gave them the modal scales just before recording. Now remember, these were accomplished musicians. It was Cannonball Adderley, Bill Evans, John Coltrane. These were not newbies at jazz. But Miles wanted their fresh, spontaneous responses rather than their rehearsed performances. Now, obviously, you know the result. Kind of Blue is a revolutionary jazz album that broke free from convention. And I believe Miles Davis understood something profound. Musicians who don't know they're breaking the rules, they don't hesitate. They don't second guess. They simply follow their instincts. They simply do. And when we don't know the rules exist, we can't be paralyzed by the fear of breaking them. Instead, we rely on the skills that got us there and let the magic free flow from there. Think about a kid drawing. They don't worry about perspective or proportions. They don't care about color theory. They simply create with unbridled imagination and joy. You may see purple polka-dotted faces or elephants with 6 legs. But guess what? Then art education happens. Art teachers need curriculum, so they are forced to structure lessons around a subject that is built around free-form expression. Suddenly there are rules about composition, about shading, about how light works. Knowledge accumulates, and with it comes the burden of correctedness. Now, I've seen this happen with my own creative process. The more I learned about design or photography or painting, the more I found myself second-guessing. Knowledge becomes a weight, a filter that ideas must pass through before reaching the canvas. So how do we treat unlearning as a creative strategy? Perhaps the most famous quote on this topic is from the filmmaker Jim Jarmusch. Now, you might not know who he is, but you probably have seen a few things he's directed. Probably his most recent film, The Dead Don't Die. Anyway, he once said, "Nothing is original. Steal from anywhere that resonates with inspiration or fuels your imagination. Select only things to steal from that speak directly to your soul." Now, what's interesting about this advice is that it requires you to know enough to steal effectively, but remain ignorant enough to combine influences in ways that experts might consider wrong. Picasso is another example. His African-inspired period emerged because he approached African masks and sculptures without the full cultural context. Now, he was first exposed to the African art at the Trocadero Museum in Paris around 1907. It, in turn, led to a radical shift in his work, and that eventually helped birth Cubism. Now, was this cultural appropriation, by today's standards? Probably, and that's a complexity maybe worth acknowledging and talking about at a future date. But it also demonstrates how partial knowledge combined with fresh eyes can transform what expertise might dismiss as misunderstanding into radical innovation. So this brings us to the topic of the intermediate plateau. There's a phenomenon in learning known as the intermediate plateau or valley of despair. Beginners make bold, sometimes brilliant mistakes because guess what? They just don't know better. And experts innovate because they understand the rules so deeply that they know precisely when and how to break those rules. But intermediates, the ones in the middle, those who know just enough to recognize rules but not enough to transcend them, often produce the most conventional work. They're trapped between ignorance and mastery, and conscious of rules but not confident enough to break them. Many creative careers stall in this intermediate phase. We learn enough to become self-conscious about breaking rules, but not enough to break them with authority. Could it be that strategic ignorance is a creative superpower? That deliberately not learning certain rules might preserve the very innocence that leads to breakthrough ideas? Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies deck, which I mentioned in my first article around this topic, contains a card that simply says, quote, "Honor thy error as a hidden intention." This isn't just accepting mistakes. It's recognizing that what expertise labels as errors might actually be new pathways that knowledge would have prevented you from discovering. Some artists deliberately impose constraints on themselves that force this ignorance. There are composers who write for instruments that they don't play. There's painters who use power drills to splatter paint with unpredictable outcomes. In many ways, my recent obsession with shooting soccer matches with film cameras is sort of this arbitrary constraint that I hope brings more creativity. We're creating artificial ignorance. We're forcing ourselves into positions where our expertise can't rely on established patterns. Earlier, I questioned whether expertise sometimes kills creativity. And then I explored how audience expectations create impossible standards as artists develop. Now I see another thread, this creative power of not knowing. The moments when we step outside our expertise, when we venture into unfamiliar territory, when we embrace beautiful ignorance, these might be our most creatively fertile times. Perhaps the most innovative creative strategy isn't accumulating more knowledge, but cultivating a beginner's relationship with our knowledge, holding it lightly, not tightly, being willing to set it aside, creating artificial spaces of not knowing. And maybe the most human thread of all is our capacity to stay between knowing and not knowing, between expertise and innocence, and between rules and our beautiful ignorance of the rules themselves. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If today's episode sparked curiosity or resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going on the Human Thread Substack. And until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the human threads that connect us.